Okay, well, welcome everyone to our latest EX Space webinar. We'll just give it a few seconds for everyone to dial in, and then we'll get going. They say never start a session with an apology, but I'm going to do that. So I've got the mother of all man colds today, so I'm here with my Lemsip and my tissues. So I apologise in advance if I have to disappear to have a coughing or sneezing fit. But hopefully I'll be able to stick with this for the hour without too many upsets. Okay, I think, Katie, are we okay to get going?
I'd give it another minute or so. We've still got people
We've still got people coming in.
Yeah, just give it a second. Yeah, but hello everybody that is here on time. You all get gold stars.
Absolutely.
It'll be good actually if folks can. Sorry, Emma. I was just going to say it'd be good if folks could share where they're tuning in from.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Advita. I always love to see where people are dialing in from or zooming in from. It's always interesting to see where in the world people are. I was going to say exactly. Great minds think alike, right?
Yeah, I noticed the koala bear on the screen that's jumped out at me. So maybe we're as far afield as Australia, but let's see.
Wow, it's a very late day in Australia. Someone's joined us from that side of the world.
So yeah, we've got the chat functionality, guys. If you want to drop in where you're dialing in from today on the chat feature, that would be fantastic.
I'm in sunny
Manchester. Koala bear is in New Jersey. I mean,
oh wow, New Jersey,
in the US. Yeah,
that's pretty good going. Ohio, New Jersey, Manchester, London, Royal Oak, Lincoln.
Oh, I was going to say hello to Zoe in Gibraltar. I know Zoe. Hi, Zoe.
Hi.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. We've got a great cross section here. Yeah, I think the guys in the States might win the prize for furthest afield at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay, Katie, if it's okay with you, should we get going? Brilliant. So welcome everyone. Welcome to our latest EX Space webinar. Today's theme is navigating the landscape of inclusivity in organisational culture. My name is Lee Smith. I'm co-founder of the EX Space. For those of you that don't know me, I'm an internal communicator by background. 3 decades really in this space, split roughly between in-house roles, mostly in financial services organisations, and then latterly running a leading internal comms agency called Gatehouse out of London, which is now part of Gallagher's employee experience practice. I'm joined today by my co-founder at the EX Space, Emma Bridger. Say hi, Emma. And also our right-hand woman, Katie Austin, who will be spinning the plates and keeping us all on track, as always, today. Last but by no means least, I'm delighted to welcome our very special guest today, the brilliant Advita Patel. Hi, Advita.
Hi, Lee.
Under the lightning bolt there, which I love, full of energy, and as well as being one of the most sort of straight-talking, sensible communicators I've ever come across. Advita is founder of Comms Rebel, as you can see there. Comms Rebel is a comms and employee experience consultancy based up in Manchester here in the UK. She's co-founder of A Leader Like Me, a global consultancy supporting organisations to be more inclusive. And she's co-host on a couple of award-winning podcasts too, Calm Edged Rebels and A Leader Like Me, Amplifying Diverse Voices. So look them up next time you're on Spotify or your channel of choice. She's president-elect, recently announced, and congratulations, Advita. President-elect for the Chartered Institute of Public Relations for 2024. That means president in 2025, I think.
It is, yeah.
And previously, like me, chaired the CIPR Inside group for internal communicators. So we've got an area of commonality as well there, Advita. She's a certified confidence coach, an experienced speaker, and has recently published her first book, which we'll talk about some of the themes from that book today, which she co-authored with Priya Bates, called Building a Culture of Inclusivity, Effective Internal Communication for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. So on behalf of us at the X-Space, Advita, a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Lee. What a wonderful introduction. Love that. Sorry, go on, Lee.
Sorry, I'll do a proper intro for the subject in a sec. A couple of quick housekeeping points, if I may. Please mute your mics until you want to make a point or ask a question, just for sound quality. We've got the chat functionality. I've mentioned that already. Please use that to introduce yourselves, make any observations or ask questions as we're going along. We'll have plenty of time at the end to put questions to Advita, so please pop those in as we're going. We're recording the webinar as well, so if you have to drop out at any point for any reason, you'll be able to catch up on this session via our YouTube channel, and also for those of you that are members of the EX Space, you of course get to access the full webinar archive on there. A few quick points really before I hand over to Advita. You know, from me on this topic, it's a hugely important subject for us all, and I think particularly for those of us that are in the business of employee experience. If, like us, you subscribe to the view that EX is all about demonstrating empathy, about being human-centric, about genuinely focusing on the individual, whoever they are, then you have to agree that inclusivity and EX go hand in hand. But it strikes me that a little like employee engagement really over the years, very often this whole area, diversity, inclusion, DEI, is often more about metrics and quotas and, dare I say, tick box compliance than it is about a real desire to listen to employees, to do the right thing, and to tap into what for me is the truly transformative potential and what you see when you have genuinely diverse teams. I also think it's a topic, and I'm sure we'll touch on this, that's surrounded by fear. You know, I think senior leaders often have the right intentions, they want to do the right thing, but they're often scared of putting a foot wrong, of upsetting someone, or being seen to support one group over another, or indeed even being ridiculed for being too woke. Woke is used as a sort of almost a point of sarcasm now. So it's an interesting time, but a massively important theme. We know that employees want to work in organisations with a clear purpose, with a strong social conscience. We know all these things are important. So really important that we focus on this. And hopefully over the course of the next half hour or so, we'll open the lid on that and look at how we as EX engagement practitioners can support leaders to really bake inclusivity into the culture of their organisations and demonstrate real, genuine diversity at every stage of that employee life cycle. So enough from me. Advita, if I can hand to you, please, for the main event.
Thank you, Lee. I'm just going to share my screen, but while I'm just sharing, I just want to clarify that what we're going to be talking about today and what I try and bring into the conversation is definitely a judgment-free zone. So I never want anyone to fear asking questions that they may believe are silly or ridiculous. There's no such thing, as we all know. I want you to feel confident and able to ask that question. If you don't want to ask it publicly, then please just send a DM to Katie, and then she can ask it on a confidential or anonymous way if that's better for you, because I know for some people they may not want to share organisations that they're working with, etc. And then, like Lee said, this is a conversation which I hope is two-way. So I'm going to share some insights from the book, as Lee very kindly mentioned throughout this conversation, but I would like us to also have a conversation. So if there's anything that I'm talking about that isn't clear and you just want some clarification, or you've got some curious questions around some of the stuff I'm sharing, then please, feel free to pop them in the chat function, and I'll stop periodically to check if we've got any questions in there. Or, feel free to put your hand up and we'll bring you on as well to have a chat. Can everyone see can you see my screen, Lee? Yeah, fab. And it's a full screen, right? It's not my note screen, is that right?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay,
we can view perfectly this end, Advita.
Good. So what I wanted to talk about first, before we get into the intricacies of inclusivity, is that big word, trust. One of the key things that Priya and I wanted to establish when we were writing the book is to talk about trust and the importance of why we need to consider this when we're building cultures of inclusivity and belonging. Without trust in our life and without trust in the work that we do with others, it's virtually impossible to build any type of inclusivity or help people understand why you're doing the work that you're doing. And those of you who are familiar with the Edelman Trust Barometer, this information I'm about to share from you is from last year's, from the 2023 report, which is Navigating a Polarized World. And what Edelman does very well, and has done so for a number of years now, is to mark where people are with their trust. And it's a global survey which interviews and surveys 100,000 people, I think, across the globe. So it has its pros and it has its cons, but generally it gives us an understanding of why trust is a critical factor. So if you think about the results that came out this year, what they said was that there's a lot of economic anxieties that are taking place, and economic optimism is collapsing around the world, with almost 24 out of the 28 countries seeing all-time lows in the number of people who think that their families will be actually better off in 5 years' time. And I'm sure many of you will agree with what we've seen currently in the news as well. It's the feeling, the optimism, the hope is depleting. Trust is getting removed from our politicians and our government. So people are now leaning a little bit more into organisations. If we look at the institutional imbalance, that was one of the other things that came in. They're saying that business, so the places where we work, are now the sole institution which are being seen as competent and ethical. And the government across the globe generally is viewed as unethical and incompetent. So business is under pressure a lot right now. And as communication professionals or HR leaders or operational leaders, there's a lot of pressure on us to advise and guide our leadership team in the right way, which means that, unfortunately, we have to consume a lot of the news that's out there, which can be a big undertaking for some of the stuff that we do. So we have to be quite mindful about why this shift is happening and why this shift in distrust in our government and the politicians around us is taking place. And then alongside that, you've got the mass class divide. And what they're saying is that people in the top quarter of income live in a very different trust reality than those in the bottom quarter, with almost a 20-point gap, which is pretty significant in Thailand, the US, and in Saudi Arabia. And then you've got the battle for the truth, right? So there's a lot of, you would have seen, there's lots of stuff around misinformation, disinformation, the content we consume, the algorithms that come our way and are based on the searches that we do. So sometimes we attract information that may not be accurate, and we can end up sharing some of that in complete innocence when we don't do our due diligence. And in terms of inclusivity and diversity, we need to make sure that we're outside of those echo chambers and we're reviewing the points of view from both sides to make sure that we have a balanced understanding about what is actually happening and where the barriers and blockers are, and what also are privileges. We all have a privilege, and I know that word privilege has had a bit of a negative connotation attached to it over the recent months and years. But as a woman of colour from the north of England, I have privileges over other individuals. So it's just recognising what those are and making sure that the information that we are looking at is from all angles, and we are not in those echo chambers. So just be quite mindful of that, and the media that we're also reviewing. So that's a trust barometer. Definitely check them out. They've got the best. One of the great things about the trust barometer is that they compare from previous years. So you can see where the gaps are and what's been going on. On that note, how do we build trust? So if you're working in an organization that is not very trustworthy, or you feel that trust is depleted, and the way you can recognize whether trust is there or not is by symptoms of how behaviors. So you may have colleagues who don't speak up, as frequently as you should be. If you're sat in a meeting, there's a lot of silence when a big change has been announced and no one's really contributing. There's anonymous feedback being left on things like Glassdoor or on LinkedIn or wherever. There's also discomfort in terms of belonging in organisations. So you may find that you have a lot more exits from marginalised groups and underrepresented colleagues. So tracking your exits is also a good indication of where trust is. And also the say-do gap. So what your leaders may be saying to their colleagues that they're working with and the actions that they actually deliver, do they align? And sometimes they don't, and that can also cause a lot of distrust. So how do we build trust in ourselves so people trust us? And how do we advise and guide our leaders to make sure that they feel trusted as well when they're speaking? And the equation that we do, there's lots of different ways of doing this as well. There's the Stephen Covey book, which is a great, the Speed of Trust, which we've referenced in our book as well. So check out that book. There's also the trust equation, which I'm going to talk about today. But there's also different experts out there who have spoken about trust. The reason we chose the trust equation is because it gives you a 360 view of what trust actually is. And the trusted advisors have been researching this topic for over 3 decades. And it's robust in terms of its due diligence. So what is the trust equation? So the trust equation is based on 3 key attributes. The first one is credibility. So what you may find in organizations is some leaders and some individuals may say, but I've got the experience, I've got the education, why don't people believe me? You know, and that is incredibly important, your words and how believable you are in terms of your credibility. But you need, alongside your credibility, the being reliable. And we often don't regard being reliable as an important attribute to building trust. And what we mean by reliable is how your actions and how much people can depend on you. So if you're a colleague, so in comms, for example, if you're saying you're going to send out a newsletter at midday on Tuesday and it doesn't go out on midday on Tuesday, and in fact it doesn't go out until the following week, or it just doesn't go out, that little bit of trust is removed. And that's a very tactical, simple example to the large scale, where leaders may say, we're very supportive of building an inclusive culture, we're going to review our policies, and we're going to make sure that we're bringing the cognitive diversity alongside demographic diversity, and then nothing happens. And a good example of this is when the murder of George Floyd happened in 2020, in May 2020. A lot of leaders went out with very bold statements, which were supported by comms and PR to get those statements out there. And then when a review took place a year later to see what impact, if the promises had been fulfilled, what the leaders had said, it was a very high statistics. I think around 70% hadn't done anything at all. So the reliability on those leaders had gone, and the trust has started to deplete in whether they believe in what they say is going to happen. And we talk a lot about engagement surveys, right? So a lot of people say engagement surveys are dead and nobody wants to fill in a survey. Engagement surveys need to be evolved. I completely understand that. And there's different ways of tracking engagement and experience in organizations rather than an annual survey. But saying that people don't want to fill in surveys because they are no longer interested is not the truth. It's because what you may find is that the actions are not being delivered. And they've lost the reliability in you in doing that. And then the third attribute on this is intimacy. And what we mean by intimacy is how much vulnerability you're showing in the organization, and if people feel safe with you. So we're in a world now where people build connections, and they want to see if they can trust you, they can trust you with information. Are you going to share that information with anybody else? How safe do people feel with their emotions if they're sharing that with you? And how are you building those relationships? And that's a big part of inclusion. You know, inclusion isn't just doing the tactical things about making sure that the policies are right and making sure that you've got an inclusive recruitment plan. It is also about relationships and getting to know each other in all aspects of life as well. Alongside those 3 attributes, what the trusted advisors say that if, for example, your motives and how you decide to focus is more about you than the people that you're supporting, all those 3 attributes will be negated. So it's the three, the formula is the three at the top, and then it's divided by self-orientation. And if you are not self-aware and you're not doing it for the goodness of the people that you're serving, and you're doing it for yourself, and you want to look better and be seen as someone who is an ally, or someone who is supporting this, you'll get found out very quickly. So you have to be conscious and intentional with your motives on why you're building this trust. So I'm just going to pause for a second, if that's okay. And I want to
absolutely, Advita. I was just going to leap in with a question there, if I may.
Yeah, please do.
I love the trust equation. It's been a favourite of mine for a long time, and it still holds true, doesn't it? In terms of senior leaders, which bit of that do you think they're struggling with the most? I've kind of got a hunch that being vulnerable, the intimacy bit actually is particularly difficult for senior folk. Would you agree, or is it one of the others?
No, intimacy and the vulnerability side of things is definitely a challenge for a lot of leaders, and people don't. And it's not about sharing your soul or bearing your soul, to every, and sharing every part of your life. It's just about being open for curiosity. The theme of our book is about being curious about each other, and as a leader, you can choose to either be a dictator at the top telling people what you need them to do, or you can choose to be inclusive in how you may work. And I would say most leaders fear being too open because they want to be seen as we know everything and everything is great. And the fear of getting it wrong is quite strong. Whereas my advice and guidance to leaders is that when people can see an element of your vulnerability, they're more forgiving. When they recognize the fact that you are also a human being. And as human beings, we will make mistakes. And mistakes it's not if, it's when, because we will. This area of work in equity, diversity and inclusion and belonging and justice is hard, and we're learning every single day, and leaders need to lean into that a little bit more and show that they're learning and say, do you know what? I don't know enough right now, but I'm going to go away and I'm going to learn. I'm going to educate myself, and then I'm going to come back with a thought. And it's okay to say that, but there is a fear around that. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense, to be sort of just be honest about. I think leaders often feel they've got to have a particular stance on something.
Yes.
And actually that's not the case here, is it? It's sometimes it's enough just to show that you care about something or are thinking about something.
Yeah, their reflections, encouraging your leader to talk openly about their reflections and advising and guiding them on the best approach. Obviously, you don't want you want the leader to lead, right? As you saw by the trust barometer, people are looking at leaders to guide them in the right way. What you don't want is a leader to be overly vulnerable and use it as a weapon in terms of, oh, I don't know, and I'm not sure, and I'm human as well. They use it as they weaponize it. And you can weaponize most things, right? And people weaponize inclusivity as well, to be fair. But it's a balance of vulnerability that you bring in. It's recognizing the fact that you are a leader and people are looking at you for guidance, but also recognizing that actually, I need a little bit of time of reflection on this and just educate, learn, speak to others, get some reverse mentoring, whatever they need to do to kind of enhance their knowledge about things that they may not be quite clear on right now, and talking through that process. I think people really appreciate that from leaders when they talk through their process rather than coming with just the answer at the end.
Absolutely. Any other questions or reflections at this stage for Advita?
Yeah, please do let me know if you've come across the trust equation before. If you think...
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and just echo what you've said already. I also love the trust equation because I think it takes this really big amorphous kind of conceptual idea like trust. How do you build trust? It's like, I wouldn't know where to start. I remember reading the book years ago and going, I love the fact they break it down and make it really tangible and really practical. And I did put a note in the chat saying that, as you know, Advita, there's actually a diagnostic in the book. You can measure yourself and you go, okay, I know the bits I need to work on, which I think is just super helpful when you're saying to leaders, hey, you need to work on your trust. Then no one's going to disagree with that, right? But a lot of leaders will go, well, where do I start? So that's a really good tip, is to check out the book and use that diagnostic. I think it's genius because it just makes it just much more practical and straightforward. And to your point, Advita, about being vulnerable, completely agree with that. You know, going back to kind of the psychologist in me, we have a sixth sense about things, and if people seem a bit too good to be true, we kind of don't trust them, because we're like, that's not, you know, that's not real, that's not normal, that's not, you know, every human makes mistakes and gets things wrong. We all have off days, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's that. And I guess because I'm a bit older than you, in terms of what I've seen in terms of my career, of the changing style of leadership. And I like to think that now I do see leaders. I mean, back in the day when I first started the corporate world, you know, you never saw a leader admit that they made a mistake. I worked for big corporates in the, you know, sort of early 90s and onwards, and you just wouldn't see it. And I remember the first kind of leader I worked with who was much more vulnerable, and thinking, wow, this is so refreshing that he was okay to say, you know what, I got it wrong. And it was like, whoa, this is brilliant. And now obviously that's much more normal, isn't it? So yeah, few thoughts.
It's really powerful. It's really powerful to be able to, for a leader, and it's powerful, but it also being aware that there's different characteristics in leaders, right? So if you've got a leader who's very charismatic and open, and I hate using labels like extrovert and introvert, because I 100% think it depends on the environment, but generally more outgoing, I would say, then they'll be a little bit more easier to manage in terms of their vulnerability, compared to a leader who may be a little bit more reserved and a reflector, who may need a little bit, and you have to adjust your style slightly on how you may get them to be more vulnerable in the way that they prefer. So not every leader will stand on stage and share their life story, and that's absolutely okay, but they may want to bring that trust by doing small walkabouts or drop-in sessions, or even a blog series, or whatever is their kind of preference, to kind of open up a little bit more about who they are and what they stand for. So I will always say, try and personalize that experience as much as you can, and it's part of the inclusivity angle, right? So inclusion doesn't discount leaders. You know, they're part of this world. You know, they're part of inclusion and belonging, and equity, diversity is also for them. It's just for the rest of the colleague population. It includes everybody. And I've worked in organizations and been brought into organizations where that hasn't really been given any consideration. Like, we also need to think about our leadership team when it comes to inclusion and how they feel in this organization, because they are still humans and they're still colleagues of this place, and they still need to be treated fairly and equitably alongside everybody else. So just as a note on that, because I think people do forget sometimes.
Totally agree.
I'll share my screen again to go on to the next section. So I'm going to talk more about the employee experience life cycle, because I think this is something that is being asked of more when I work in organisation, in terms of what does inclusivity mean at each different stage. So it's highly dependent on the influence that you have, and the decision-making capabilities that you have, and the impact that you have as well. But what I will always say to folks, that this is one of many different life cycles that are out there, and there's different versions of this, but this is the one that I tend to use when I'm describing how we may bring in more inclusivity in the work that we do. So if you go from the first stage, which is about attraction, and how do you make sure that you're helping a diverse set of people apply and be attracted to the roles that you might have on offer. And I will always say to people, you know, sense check the language that you're using in your job adverts, because when you're in that place for a long time, or if you've been kind of conditioned to think a certain way, you may not spot it. So always test it with other professionals in your community, or if you're working with a consultant or a contract, get them to check it. Someone from just slightly outside of your business, so they can read it and think, oh, hang on, this word is a little bit maybe too masculine, for example, you know, when we talk about genderized language, or things like, you know, we want someone to be on the ball 24/7. It kind of implies that you don't allow people to have downtime in any of that kind of stuff. And there's certain words that you have to be quite mindful about in job adverts. So just think about the language that you're using. Also, where are you advertising these jobs? You know, you may advertise on LinkedIn, you might ask a couple of your contacts to share it, but being mindful of the demographics of the people that you're asking to share, and reach out of people outside of your echo chamber to share that job advert. And it's a very simple move, but a thing that many people consider. So I will often get a few people messaging me saying that, can you share this with your communities, especially with my Leader Like Me network, which is a very diverse group of comms professionals. in there. So see who are the influencers, the impact makers in the industry, and see if they would reshare or pass it on to people in their communities that you may not be able to reach with your networks. So be mindful of that. Also, what does representation look like for you when it comes to your recruiters? And if you use a recruitment agency, one of the things that I would advise for you to ask your recruiters in terms of what are their processes to make sure that their job advert is going in different demographics and different communities. And the warning or a red flag for me is if everybody in that recruitment firm looks exactly the same and has similar lived experiences, because they won't have the diversity of thought or the cognitive diversity needed to maybe think about different communities and how they may present that advert. So those are very simple tactical tips. And then when we move into the recruitment side of things, so when you do interviews, have a think about your panel that you're interviewing. You know, is it representative? Do you need to bring in someone external to make it representative? How does that look for you? Are you doing, if you're doing them online, are you having enough breaks in between the questions that you're asking? Are you giving colleagues, colleagues your questions in advance? A lot of organisations start to do this now for those who may be neurodivergent or may need or more reflectors and may need some time to kind of understand what the question is asking of them. And do you do anonymous sifting as well? That's important. There's a research done not so long ago where there was a review on names. So anyone who had a foreign sounding name were 2/3 more likely to be rejected for that opportunity than someone who had an English or a Western sounding name. And that's reality, and those are facts, and it does happen. So you may believe that it doesn't happen, but our biases sometimes will not tune in quick enough, and especially if you're working at pace. So there may be something you think, hang on, why did I reject that application? Let me just stop, reflect, get someone else to review it and make sure I'm making the right decision. Especially when things are automated. And remember that the algorithms, AI technology is incredible, but it's been developed by people who may think the same or from the same community. So there's challenges in some of those AI technology as well when it comes to bias. So just be quite mindful about that as well. And then when you go on to onboarding, do you have an induction plan for the people who are coming in? Do you have a user guide? There's a thing called the user guide of me, which I'll share with Lee and Emma and Katie after this, where you can get a colleague to fill it in terms of what their preference is and how they work. Not everybody is going to be an early bird, the meetings before 10 o'clock, it doesn't suit everybody. Some people are better between 2 and 3. And it's important to know that about your team and make adjustments where possible in terms of to get the best out of them. So this user guide of me is a really useful tool. And it's just a form that you send out to any new recruits so you can get to know them a little bit more. Things like welcome packs are really meaningful as well. So this shows that you're joining the organization and you're being looked after. I've been in so many different roles where you're waiting for the technology to get sorted, the laptop's missing, the phone, God knows where it's gone, you don't have an email address, things are missing. And when that happens, you're already setting off on a bad foot there, and the exclusion is real. And when you're marginalized and underrepresented, it feels even worse because you're already coming into a community where there's not many people who look like you, and then all of a sudden the stuff isn't aligned properly, so you feel even more disengaged from what's going on. And then the development side is like, do you do development check-ins? Do you have equitable investment in training and development? Not everybody learns in a classroom well. Are you giving people options on how they may want to learn? Is the funding that you got available aligned with what people need in terms of development? Are you leaning on someone more than other person? Just be quite conscious about the development side. Retention is around the frequent recognition. I worked in an organization where they'd given out awards every month to people who are doing some really good work, and the person who was a decision maker was not really paying attention to their community, the people that they liked, and chatted with them. And everybody that was getting the award had very similar personalities. And then they made commentary around those who were quieter and not confident. And that was quite interesting to hear their observations on that. And they didn't recognize they were doing that until I mentioned their viewpoints, and they stopped and reflected and realized, actually, for the last 6 months, I've just been giving recognition to people who are chatty, bold, and are out there. So just those little things are symptoms of making sure, do we have an inclusive culture here? Are we allowing people to belong? Are we just saying that you have to be this type of personality? And then the kind of end part is that separation. When people are leaving, do you do exit interviews so you can mark and track why people might be leaving. Is there a pattern of behavior? Do you have a certain demographic that's leaving over others or characteristic? And that's a really good indication of making changes in the organisation as and when they come in as well. A lot of people don't look at exit interviews in that way. A lot of comms and HR, a lot of communications professionals don't use exit interviews to use in terms of maybe rehashing some of the way they may communicate, because there's lots of clues in what people are saying. So try and get access to those things if you can. Does that resonate with folks, the employee life cycle? Is there any questions? I mean, these are just, there's many more tactics that you can put below this, but I would always encourage you to have a look at your life cycle and see where the gaps are, and bring the people in the rooms to have those conversations that are responsible for each of those areas to see what they're doing, to make sure that you're not doing anything too inadvertently.
Yeah, that's really useful, Advita, and what you've shown is all the way through that life cycle there's opportunities to demonstrate genuine inclusivity and make some practical changes. One of the things that EX practitioners always struggle with is, where do I start? What would you recommend? Is it better to start at the beginning with the recruitment piece, or further along the line with, say, the development piece? Where would you recommend people start with this journey?
It depends where your problem areas are, Lee. So if you find that there's a load of people who are exiting the business and they are a similar characteristic or demographic, then there's a challenge in terms of potentially development or retention, right? So have a look at what your kind of key areas of issue, where your problems are. If your problem is around not having a cognitive diversity of people who are applying for jobs in terms of cognitive and representation diversity, then there's a problem there in terms of where are you advertising those roles. So have a look at what your kind of blockers and what are your leaders talking about? You know, what is the problem for them? Is it that people are leaving? It's a lot of money, right, to recruit somebody into the organization. It costs a lot of money, and when you attach profits and revenue to these milestones, it becomes a much more serious topic in the organizations. If you're struggling to kind of get the buy-in from leaders, then have a look at the cost implications underneath each of these. And the cost is, if you're spending all that energy recruiting and the time training somebody, add all that up, it tells you how much it's cost. If they're exiting within 6 months and they need to do the thing again, it's a continuous cycle. So it's really important to listen to the pain points of your leaders. What are they saying? Are they talking about retention? Are they talking about recruitment? Are they talking about people exiting? Are they talking about development? You know, sometimes leaders will say things like, we don't have the talent pipeline right now, so we don't have any, and then you have to kind of understand why. Like what's the challenge on that? You know, why don't you have a talent pipeline? Why don't you have representation at a board level? And asking those curious questions if you're a HR professional, and then the comms would support in terms of managing the content around that to make sure that you're addressing some of the challenges that leaders are facing.
Okay, and there's obviously a process side to this, and then there's I guess more of a hidden side. So you talked about exit strategy, and when people leave, you know, often organizations, one of the customs that an organizations has is how they celebrate the departure of someone. You know, we all go out for a drinks down the pub, or so there's that side of things as well, isn't there, which we need to make sure are really inclusive as well.
I always say to leaders that I work with that it should never be a shock when someone's leaving or wants to leave. Like, it should always be part of, you should know if you've got a good relationship, and the reality is that people will leave, right? People will leave because they want to progress, they've relocated, they want a new opportunity, whatever the reasons are. But as a leader, you should never really be a big shock that somebody is going in that way, because if you're connected with them on a regular basis and you're having real conversations, then it should be quite clear. You want to be able to, if they're leaving because they don't feel included or don't feel they're being supported in the right way, you should know that quite early on by their performance, by absence, maybe distraction. If you're tuned in a little bit more and you're asking kind of those curious questions that we talk about, then you can plan a good exit strategy, to your point, Lee, and celebrate the fact that somebody that you've mentored and supported is now progressing into a bigger and better opportunity. That's the ideal situation, right? We want everyone who exits really to go on to bigger and better things. We never want anyone to leave because they feel unheard or excluded or feel like they don't belong, and have struggled with all of that, which impacts not only your physical being but also your mental well-being. And I've met so many people who've had to leave businesses because they just don't feel that their value is being appreciated, because their leaders haven't recognized the contributions that they're making for whatever reason. So it's just being quite mindful about, hang on, this person, when they first came in, was quite, you know, joyous and energetic, and were coming up with lots of innovative different ideas. I've seen a bit of a slip. I wonder what's happening. Let me ask those questions about what's going on. And just being mindful of those kind of things, I think it's really important. And we don't do that often because we're busy, like we use the word busy a lot. And you'll know if you listen to our podcast, we always say that busy is another excuse for a different priority. And Jenny Field shared that with me when we were doing our podcast together, because she read it in Matt Haig's, I think it's Matt Haig's book, but that's what, you know, when we say we're busy, it actually means that you just got different priorities, and that's okay, but just be conscious of the impact that will have.
Good stuff. I'm sensing some love for the idea of a user guide of me, or a user guide for me. Love that idea. What a practical way of expressing the needs of each individual.
Oh, it's so simple as well, and you can adapt it to whatever that, you know, what you can adapt it as well. So if every colleague received one of these when they started and it was given to their line manager, I would love to do some research on this, but I guarantee the relationships would be improved like completely, because you know, you get to know that person right from day one in terms of, look, this is and you can have those real honest conversations, right? So somebody says, oh, I don't do any meetings between 10 and 3. It's not realistic, right? So you can have those conversations, say, look, we need you to be available for this core meeting at this time. And that's where the breakdown of communication often happens, is when we don't have real conversations. And we're worried of going into productive conversations or productive disagreements, as I call them. And that user guide of me is quite useful to kind of help, you know, angle those conversations in the right way.
We'd love to share that after as part of the follow-up. Any other questions or observations, or should we let Advita carry on? Let's go.
So I just wanted to kind of give this very quick overview on how you may want to advise and guide your leaders who, you know, we said before, what if they're a bit stuck and not quite sure where to go? So we talk about listen, learn, and lean in our book. And what we say under the listen section is that active listening, you know, so how, and we talk, and know a lot of people talk about listening, but specifically active listening. What we mean by active listening is like no distractions around you whatsoever. I cannot tell you how many meetings I've been involved in where I've observed behaviours where everybody is on their phones or on their laptops when somebody's presenting, or they're having side conversations on Teams, or they are whispering to each other. No, like that is a sign and a red flag of respect. So if that is the case, then I would advise people to maybe leave their phones on the side. And if the note-taking thing is, you know, well, we'll take notes on there, then, you know, we have to trust them to do that, but be very clear as the chair of that meeting that there'll be no side conversations taking place on laptops only to be used to take notes in the meeting. Because that, you know, and even when you're having one-to-ones, you know, when your emails are pinging, turn your laptop off. It's little things like that that make such a difference for inclusion and helping people belong. Thinking about the channels that leaders want to communicate through as well. Not every leader is going to be comfortable with, like I said before, standing on stage and addressing 100, 200,000 people. Find what works for them and help them. And if they have to address a big audience because it's part of their role, then coach them in how you may manage that conversation with them as well. Observation, like I said, is a big part of what we're doing, and taking action. So when you're listening to people, what actions are you actually taking, and make sure that the leaders are accountable for that. So note down. So if you're part of that conversation, if you're a HR leader and you're part of that, then make sure that you make sure the leader has that accountability. If a leader has said something publicly on the newsletter, on the intranet, or done a video, then make sure you ask them questions about what the next stage is and what the next steps are, because they've already announced it. And I would always talk about consequences. So if they get a bit irritated by you reminding them of their promises, then I would talk about the consequences of them not delivering when it comes to their reputation and trust. And when you talk about that, that's when they tend to listen to what you're saying, because nobody wants their reputation in the organization to be seen as someone who doesn't deliver what they promise. And then in terms of learning, make sure that they do regular check-ins. They're asking those curious questions. They're using data as well. We always try and do this kind of blanket approach sometimes. And if you're a leader that's managing several different departments, not every department will need the same approach. So use that data of those departments to advise and guide that leader in terms of what the challenges are. If performance is low, is it because they've got too much going on? Is it because their manager in that team doesn't have the support that they need to deliver against their objectives? Those signals will give you an idea of what's going on. Same with the connection. So we're in a hybrid world a lot of the time. So a lot of our calls are done on Teams or on Zoom, Slack, what conversation taking place on Slack. Be very intentional about the connections that the leader is making, and make sure that you do regular, when they're in the office or when they're in the workplace, that they are carving out time to go and have a chat with a few people to build those connections and be visible. Those very simple tactics that we used to have, that was a norm, I would say probably 10, 15 years ago, still applies even more today. And in terms of leaning into that, is looking at the influence that they may have, and that again, you can capture the influence by the reaction that individuals have towards that leader. Do they have the influence in the organization to allow people to follow what they're saying? Do they update people on a regular basis? Are they vulnerable and honest with what they are sharing? And are you measuring that impact as well, so you can use that data to give them the advice, whether what went well and what didn't go as well? And in order to build those relationships with that leadership team, you yourself needs to look at your own trustworthiness. How do you build trustworthiness with that leader so they lean into you and ask you those questions and bring you in to those conversations about their communication style in the organization? Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions about what I just shared there?
It does. Again, just an observation, really. We've just published our first EX report study at Advita, and one of the big findings from that is that building the capability of line managers is the number one challenge that organizations are facing. It's also a very high priority for a lot of the practitioners we surveyed.
Yeah,
I guess here, senior leaders are responsible for setting the tone, I guess, almost. But actually, a lot of the grunt work, if you like, comes from line managers. It's that day-to-day conversation with your immediate middle manager, line manager, whatever you want to call them, where this really lives or dies. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I'll just put the next slide on, because one of the pitfalls is that not coaching line managers in their communication skills. I've worked in internal comms for 20 odd years, and it's been one of the top, I would say, key priorities in behaviors that concern communication professionals when it comes to line manager comms. I can't tell you how many conferences, even the Gatehouse survey that you used to do, Lee, and now the Gallagher survey, comes up time and time again, that line managers are the critical kind of communication channel in our organization that don't have the skills. And you have to remember, most of these line managers have probably been promoted because of their technical ability, not necessarily their people skills. And I'm still flummoxed on why we're struggling with this population after so many years, especially with the technology and the tools we now have available. But it is one of the pitfalls, that coaching style with those managers, and making sure that they have the tools and the support that they need to communicate effectively is just as important as them going off and doing an MBA or going off and doing a leadership course about XYZ. Communication skills should be one of the key priorities for any new leader or line manager that's coming into, or anyone who's responsible for managing another person. That's really important. I'm not going to go through all of these because of time, because I want to get to questions, but I wanted to put these out there. I'm going to talk about it in detail in the book as well, so those of you who read it will have seen this. But things like not having any opportunity to feed back, irrelevant messaging, that action fatigue, that lack of action fatigue. People, like I said before, people are not tired of giving their opinion and thoughts on how things can be better. People are tired of action not being taken, and it's exhausting. And when you talk to underrepresented individuals and marginalized people, and you're asking them to share what could happen in the organization for it to be better, and trust me when I tell you this, that it's a massive mental turmoil on a lot of people to dig deep and share that. You know, a lot of marginalised and underrepresented people just want to do a job well, and they want to be treated fairly and equitably. And when you're asking them to explore their thinking a little bit deeper about what could we do to be better, then you don't do anything, that's actually quite harmful. And if you don't want to do anything, then don't ask. That's my thing. You know, don't celebrate the fact that you have Black employees, Black History Month, if you're not actually going to change the way the behaviours are towards your Black colleagues in terms of promotional opportunities or equitable training. Same with International Women's Day. If you have no intention of helping women progress to senior leadership or helping them progress in their career, and you're just celebrating the fact that you have women in your organisation, don't do it, because it's harmful and it'll cause much more uncertainty and discouragement than it will you doing it. So be very mindful about some of these awareness days that you might be asked to promote, and ask the question about what have we done since last year to help women progress in the organisation, to help our Black colleagues move forward, to help our LGBTQ plus community feel like they belong. What differences have we made, and what can we say to our community that the improvements we have made? And if you haven't, then think carefully. Definitely think carefully about why you're doing it. And then we're going to go into questions, but this is just a few. If you haven't read the book, and thank you for Danielle for sharing that she's read it and she enjoyed the read. Honestly, this type of feedback makes our day, because it's always a bit, and folks who have written books will know this, but it's always a bit worrying if it's actually hitting the mark in the right way. But the book is available through most of your online bookstores. You can also get directly from Kogan page, where you can save 20% if you use the Comms Rebel code, which is exclusive to the X Space members as well, and the folks who are on this webinar today. And I've also managed to get chapter 11 from Kogan page, which is all about how to build an inclusive engagement, an inclusive engagement and employee experience plan. And that can be, so if you don't want to read the entire book, that's absolutely fine. You've got a free chapter to download through the Kogan page link, which Lee and Emma and Katie will share with you. So
thanks, Advita. Thanks for your generosity with that as well. It's a great chapter. It's a very chunky chapter, I think nearly 30 pages, and some great tools in there. So definitely worth digging into. We'll open up for questions now. I think we've got about 7 minutes to the hour, so we've got a little bit of time to open up to reflections. I'll just start the ball rolling. I mean, you've painted a picture. You started with the Edelman, you know, the crisis of trust, and I guess, you know, what we're seeing is a world that's becoming even more polarized and challenging, and we've got Israel and Gaza going on at the moment. And is all this getting harder and harder, or do you see signs that this is becoming more natural?
I think it's because we have access to this information more than we've ever had before. You know, if you think about the last 20 years, we're now consuming more content than we've ever consumed before. Our information and news initially was always through the papers or what the television channels, you know, decided to share on their news stories. Now we have access to people who are taking videos, who are sharing their own accounts of what's going on in some of these horrific situations. And you know, before we came online, we spoke about the fact that as human beings, we're not conditioned to consume so much horror in our lives. You know, our generation, if we go right back to generations years ago, we're all about the smaller communities that we lived in, the tribes that we were part of, and we only really found out what was going on if we passed somebody along the way, right? It was that kind of stuff. Now, 24/7, we're switched on to absolutely everything that's going on globally. And you can't really escape it unless you make an intentional choice to exit from that. And that's a privilege, right? And as communication professionals and HR leaders, like I said at the start, we have a duty of care to our leaders, in essence, to advise them the right stuff to share. So if we talk about Israel and Gaza and the horrific situation there, I've had a few people come to me and say, how do we communicate what's happening to our colleagues to show that we do care about what's happening over there? We're just really worried about going into the political side of this or the intricacies beneath all of this that may come across as that we're siding with one over the other. And I will always say, you know, it's really important that you center the colleagues and you centre the people that you're working with. So it's about making sure that they have the right support available. So whether you're Jewish colleagues or Muslim colleagues, or even people who are directly and indirectly impacted, what support is available for them? Can they get the help? This is the right time for you to promote your employee assistance program. If you have counsellors and mental health advocates, make sure that they have got the right information so they can guide and coach people. If you have the ability to send people off for counselling and support, then make sure that you promote that in the right way as well. You can condemn the horrificness that's going on over there. Absolutely. I think that's fair for you to do that. But also be really mindful that this is about your colleagues and how they're feeling right now. And with the news and the stuff that's on there, it's a lot right now. And there'll be people who are directly impacted with friends and family, either in Israel or in Palestine, who are suffering by what's going on. So if you are in that space right now, focus on the help that you can provide to your colleagues. Make sure that you're using sources that have been factually verified, and you're sharing information that is have done the due diligence on there as well, because there is, as you can imagine, lots of misinformation, hearsay, and stuff going on.
Thanks, Advita. Yeah, it's a really tough challenge, that one. Katie, Emma, any thoughts, observations coming from the audience or from yourselves?
I've got a question that's come through to me, actually. Question for Advita. What are your thoughts on the effectiveness of reciprocal mentoring to help marginalised employees?
I think it's a good plan. You know, if you anything that you can do to help each other in terms of mentorship is always. I'm a huge advocate of coaching and mentoring, and I will never say to folks that you shouldn't really do it. But I would just be mindful about the balance and the power. So if you are getting mentorship peer to peer, because you want to learn from different communities and different demographics to expand your knowledge, make sure it's an equal relationship, right? You're not just getting everything from them to make yourself feel better or good about what's going on. It has to be an equal, balanced relationship, and it's actually a mentoring role, not me just taking an hour of someone's time to ask curious questions about their community or their culture or heritage. So just be quite mindful of that. So if you do it properly and it's an equal balance in terms of the exchange, then yes, 100%. I would recommend doing it. Just make sure you've got clear guidelines in place about what it is and what it isn't, and how it works, and be conscious of that. But yeah, I would say it's a good way forward.
Okay, I think we're very close to the hour. One last final question from anyone?
I'm just going to address what Nisha shared in the chat there about the Gaza and Israel, about it being treated, how it's been dealt differently from Russia and Ukraine. Yes, it has, and it is, and you do have to question, the biases that we may have over what happened in Ukraine to what's going on in Gaza. And it's an uncomfortable question that we often have to lean into. I would, I've had a lot of my friends say, I don't really know what's going on. I'm not quite sure where I stand with this. I think what's happened is terrible, but I'm not sure. My advice will always be, take that time and go and learn a little bit more from both sides, and educate yourself on why do you think the media is not reporting as much as it did for the Ukraine and Russia? What is the reason behind that? And it is uncomfortable, and it can be discomfort, and it can be awkward, and we can get defensive when people question that, and it's okay to feel a bit defensive, but just be mindful about why, and go and do your research and educate yourself properly, because it is distressing for a lot of people who are impacted directly to see that the care and concern for maybe the Palestinians who are going through what they're going through right now isn't there compared to what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, went and did what they have to do without getting political. But it is important to recognize that the difference, and you will get asked these questions in your workplace by people, so just be aware of that and have a response ready to go.
And also it's okay to say, I don't really know all the answers, I need to go and grow and find out. And it's okay. I think over the course of the last, particularly, well, probably since 2020, more and more people are sort of putting themselves out there and saying, I might have got it wrong in the past, or I still don't know properly how to do this. And actually, that's part of the journey, isn't it? Having conversations and admitting that and growing.
Yeah, and saying that, I may say this a bit clumsily, and apologists correct me if I say it clumsily. Like, people are not calling it a war, for example, because they said it's very one-sided. So how can it be a war? And it's things like that. Just being careful about how we may use some of the terms. And I will share actually some really good articles that have been sent to me about this situation that's going on right now to help you in terms of terminologies that you might want to use, and just being mindful about how you may advise your leaders. So I'll share that with Lee, Emma, and you as well, Katie, so you can share it with the community.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Advita. We'll get that out to folk. We're over the hour.
How is her book published internationally?
Yes, it is. It's available it's available globally. Yeah, you can get it from Amazon.
Amazon and all good bookstores.
The US Kogan page site as well.
Absolutely. We'll send a link to that as well. Just to wrap up, thank you, Advita. Thanks so much. Really fascinating and interesting subject, and a lot to think about there, and more importantly, a lot to do and to take action on. And it doesn't have to be some huge initiative. You can make a difference by just tackling small things that are within your sphere of influence. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. You're more than welcome. Thank you for inviting me. Really appreciate it.
Just a quick commercial break. We have some amazing additional webinars coming up over the next few weeks, just to flag those. 31st of October, the critical role of line managers. We touched on line managers earlier in employee experience and engagement, which is the first of a two-part webinar series that we're running looking at line managers. 6th of November, we're joined by our next VIP, Bruce Daisley. Bruce is one of the leading commentators on the world of work here in the UK and globally. He's going to talk to us about how we find the joy of work in a hybrid world. So that promises to be a great session. And the 15th of November, second part of our line manager webinar series is looking at our EX Space Manager Toolkit and how we actually empower and equip managers to do the job that they need to do. So keep a lookout for those, open to all, and we'd love to have you come and join us again. Thank you all to the audience. Thank you for joining us and for your questions and thoughts today. Advita, big thanks again from Emma, Katie, and I. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Advita. Brilliant
Thank you,
session.
everybody. Really good to see you.
Cheers,
all.
everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.